is on an average ICO. So I think, you know, as issuers, you need to be picking legal counsel who can advise you from a global perspective. And what's more, you need to make sure that they're advising you across the whole of your offering. It's no good if you've got an opinion and then they didn't look at the T's and C's on the issuance platform. The T's and C's on your issuance platform should exclude class actions.
T's and C's is terms and conditions.
Sorry, legal speak.
We like to shorten all our words down to acronyms.
Lawyers are obviously horrible people, and you obviously want to avoid us, but do make sure that your lawyers are involved in your process end to end. That they've seen all of the documents, they've seen all of the terms that any person purchasing your tokens are going to see. It is important that they give you coverage all the way through the process, because it's not just securities law, it's tax law, it's common fraud, it's common misstatement. Even certain people in the SEC have claimed fiduciary duties. But also, you know, that there are jurisdictions that we consider no-go right now. People's Republic of China and Korea are probably top of that list. The European law is broadly a good match to US law. I'm always surprised when issuers want to exclude the US because it's a relatively predictable jurisdiction. But the one thing you have to understand about both the EU and the US is these are common law jurisdictions. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of cases within the Howey test. That certainty isn't coming, as the way Marco says, because there are thousands of cases within Howey, each within a string.
And the Howey test is the securities law test in the US, just for people. It's a Supreme Court case, it's a decision. Lays out a roadmap of what is a security in the U.S. for courts to look at.
Yeah, and it's a case from the 1970s, or right? What is
maybe
72. So, you know, it's the case in the United States that sets forth the test of what token is a security is about orange groves, and it's something
super on point. Super on point.
Yeah, super on point. So it depends on how you look at it, right? It could be sort of an admission that this common law approach that we have in the U.S. is just not elastic enough, and that how could a test about orange groves possibly yield a useful result about what token is a security or not? From the other perspective, maybe it's a testament to sound principles-based regulation and how he calls back to us through the decade. It depends how you look at it, I guess. But so we talked about U.S. law, and look. The SEC is probably like the second most powerful federal agency in the world, maybe government agency in the world. Do entrepreneurs, do token sellers in particular, really have to look at the regulations for foreign jurisdictions?
Heck yes, if you're selling into them.
Well, I want to push back on that. So obviously that's the right answer. You follow the law.
I think there's an advantage to starting with the SEC and being US law, or particularly thereafter EU law compliant. Because firstly, it's easy to do. It's within I mean, to be clear again to everyone, there are a group of practitioners, this is a good representation, who've done several ICOs and know what they're doing. Whenever you're hiring your lawyer, ask them how many ICOs they have done on which ones. You really want to see them have them run through 4 or 5 recently, and make sure that your legal counsel are experienced. But you know, the concern that I always try to express to our clients, and obviously we're just acting as a consultancy and trying to kind of steer the legal process, but you know, the penalty for securities fraud in China is death. Admittedly, the penalty for many things in China is death. But the penalty for securities fraud, particularly in several Asian jurisdictions, is very severe, and the statute of limitations can be up to 20 years. And, you know, again, one of the questions that we always ask our clients is, why do you have to do a token sale? Why can't you do a conventional raise? Why do you need the platform? You should have a platform adoption reason to be doing a token sale. That token should be integral within your platform. And you need to understand who's going to buy and why they're going to buy, and ultimately who and where they're going to trade. And all of those things involve aspects of law, and I think, you know, there are jurisdictions that are more flexible, like Singapore, and there are others that are looking pretty active in Korea is one of them.
So what about the secondary market? Right. Not only do we have a secondary market now for blockchain tokens, but we also have markets for derivatives on those tokens. Right. So the CFTC doesn't generally regulate spot markets, but when there are derivatives involved, obviously the price of the underlying asset affects the secondary, the price of the derivative. So what should entrepreneurs be looking at now that we have brand new regulators involved, now that we have the CFTC, for example, involved in regulating the derivatives markets? We just had we just had an enormous roller coaster over the last 48 hours in the price of the underlying assets that drive these secondary markets. People have been accused of painting the tape, right? People have been accused of market manipulation. Crypto Twitter is afire with allegations. If you're on crypto Twitter, like
Really? I thought it was very tame usually.
yeah, it's a very relaxed atmosphere on crypto Twitter. How does this change? How does this change the landscape?
Well, I think it's important for especially entrepreneurs in the U.S. to understand that we really have this patchwork system of regulation in America, right? So not only do you have to worry about securities issues, but you certainly have the commodities issues here, and those are typically limited to that. The CFTC often doesn't get involved in the spot market, as you said, which is the underlying market for the commodity, but certainly they can per their anti-fraud provisions, right? So to the extent that there is painting the tape going on with the underlying asset, that there is market.
So I said painting the tape. Can you explain what are some of these forms of market manipulation?
Well, I mean, more broadly, the anti-fraud provisions, right, basically permits the CFTC under some larger powers to step in and regulate misconduct in a variety of forms, where it may not involve an option contract or a swap or a derivative. It involves the spot market itself. So it's a variety of different type of misconduct. As you said, crypto Twitter is a fire, which is a great way to put it, of some very salacious allegations that may or may not be true. And to the extent they are, I think I wouldn't be surprised to see a great deal more action or attention from the CFTC going forward.
Just so everyone understands, paying the tape is paying someone, usually as a counterparty transaction, to move the price of a particular cryptocurrency at a particular time by a particular amount. And paying the tape has been rife within the cryptocurrency exchanges for over 3 years. It's one of the biggest issues alongside bot activity. I know of a lot of people who were trying to sell down coins that we refer to beginning with an S, and there was a lot of bot activity last night, spitting back orders very, very, very quickly.
Yeah. So what about, there's been a lot of discussion around how to issue tokens under and this is just the last issue I want to hit around securities tokens issuance, or securities laws and tokens issuance. But there's been a lot of talk around avoiding the securities laws in issuing tokens. We talked about how courts may or may not find that some of these attempts worked or didn't work. It's probably one of the first questions courts are going to answer. But what about those sales that aren't seeking to avoid the securities laws, that aren't seeking to fail the Howey test? What about those tokens that aren't even investment contracts? They're just plain securities. They are tokens that are investment products, equities. They are limited partnership interests in venture funds. Is there a real future for that under the law? Does that make sense as a business model, given this whole world of securities regulation that can be oftentimes technology specific? Does a securities token that probably doesn't fit into that very easily, does that make sense? I get people calling me, asking me, I want to use the securities laws. I just want to sell a share of real estate on the blockchain and make it a token and democratize real estate.
That doesn't work.
I mean, you get 2 or 3 days a day, right? So is there a future for that? Just, let's say, using the securities laws?
I think so. And I think if you want to be clearly providing a return, if you want to be rewarding, I think there's a real opportunity to engage angel investors in a completely different way to how VC has historically done this. Angels have an extraordinary amount of experience to give. They're often in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. A 15-year lockup is quite often beyond their lifespan. So a security token that is designed to have some form of return, particularly through burning, we think there is going to be a future because of the certainty that comes with it. The SEC has broadly speaking said that they will not touch 5 or 6 C Reg D offerings, even if they're ICOs. We think there are other pieces of legislation within the Jobs Act, specifically Regulation A+, which allows you to raise up to 50 million. And these are completely unrestricted securities that immediately trade. And we are very supportive of, and we are aware of several what are called alternative trading systems, ATSs, that are on their way to being up. And we should see 5 or 6 of these by Q2 of this year.
So when issuers use the securities laws like that, you usually see the offering accompanied by this long recitation of risks, right? Risk factors at PPM where they say, A, sky could fall, we could all die tomorrow. You could lose your money. The building could collapse, we could all die tomorrow. You could lose your money. The network forks, 51% attacks, you know, all of those risk factors. For the litigators on the panel, do those stop you? Do those really make it difficult for you? If somebody comes to you and says, I lost a lot of money in a token sale, and you say, okay, send me the paperwork, you read the paperwork, and you see something that was written by me, which was probably, if I wrote it, probably copied from Emma, and it's just a long list of risk factors that say you could lose your money, and you sign this agreement knowing that these risks could be the case, and you take the risk of loss for that. If I come to you and I show you those documents and say, I lost a lot of money, can we sue these guys? What do you say?
Well, litigators, we pride ourselves on being creative and savvy. So, you know, you'd have to look, of course, it again depends on the facts. You have to look at what happened, you have to look at the terms, you have to look at the disclosures, you have to make an assessment of what court this would fall under, state or federal, what kind of, you know, legal causes of action can you bring? I mean, it's a pretty complicated assessment.
So are those waivers always enforceable?
It depends. That's the lawyer's answer, right? It really depends. Like, I'll say that all the time. It depends. So, you know, look, if you feel like you've been wronged, you should go to a lawyer, and they can just talk with you about what may have happened there and what your legal rights may or may not be. I think, you know, companies that are well advised often have disclosures and things that fairly account for the risk, and therefore those disclosures make it very difficult to bring a suit, or at least one that will survive, right? A lot of you can just file a lawsuit. That's pretty common here in the US. The question is, will it actually get past all these hurdles the courts have? Motions to dismiss, motions for summary judgment, a jury deciding they agree with you. So it depends. That's going to be on my grave, I guess.
And what if your defense counsel, does that inch-thick recitation of risks, does that make you feel comfortable?
Well, let me flip the script on you, right? So as someone who's prepared a great number of private placement memorandums, the general thought is that you disclose every risk, every material risk that you could reasonably think of. And so I'll never forget, one of the first times I ever prepared a private placement memorandum, I went to the senior partner who was teaching me how to do it, and I said, well, this is long before blockchain was a concern that made its way into these disclosures. I said, how is anyone ever going to raise money with, like, disclosing that an asteroid might fall, or, this land that we're buying may be filled with toxic waste or something, right? So you put any number of incredibly remote risks in there, and so before it ever gets to Brian's desk, you still got to cross it with your client. You as the entrepreneur need to swear what these risks are, but it's important to note that as difficult as it seems, when you read that extremely long document with these crazy risks that make it seem like you're out there doing something very speculative and dangerous, that actually may be the saving grace by the time defense counsel gets a hold of it, because it's the things that were not disclosed, that did not find their way into that type of document, which is where you typically wind up getting into trouble.
All right. So let's depart from the securities laws for the moment. We started off talking about how things have changed over the last year or two. where really the primary concern when I first got into crypto as a lawyer wasn't securities laws, it was money services laws. It was FinCEN, it was that federal boogeyman. It was the Department of Financial Services creating the BitLicense.
And state law.
What's that?
All the state laws.
And all of the other 53 different sovereigns you have to deal with if you're interested in transmitting money in the US. But, you know, that's changed materially. I think that it's changed. I'm just a big straw man up here, by the way, just so you know. I think that that's changed. But over the last 2 years, we've seen very little from FinCEN, at least on the public stage. The BitLicense, the notorious BitLicense, has never been enforced. In California, we still don't have a money transmitter license for crypto companies. In Colorado, despite aggressive prosecutors and law enforcement, still nothing major happening there. So, do we still have to care about money transmitter law?
Yeah. Sorry. Well, so it depends on how you structure. If we're talking about ICOs, I mean, definitely if you're talking about exchanges, you have to worry about it, and it's, as you know, you can't just, it's rare that you're going to want to have, I just want to do business in New York because they have the BitLicense, so that's it. But even with the ICOs, depending on how the tokens are issued and redeemed, and if they can be redeemed in such a way that people get actual money or something useful out of them. Right now, I think that they haven't, FinCEN hasn't said much, but that doesn't mean there aren't Bank Secrecy Act concerns. FinCEN, so SEC and the CFTC, those organizations, those agencies are in charge of protecting investors and sort of the public. FinCEN is in charge of combating money laundering. And with all of the ICOs, with all these different blockchains out there, there's a lot of, and perhaps people not policing who's doing business on them all that carefully. There's a lot of room, I think, for money laundering concerns. And I think we'll see more scrutiny of that sort of thing, depending on how the sponsors are redeeming tokens and how the money flows through the system in general.
I think you're also, not just the regulators, but law enforcement is looking at FinCEN, works as Treasury officials. Law enforcement looks at those things like, when you're buying and selling tokens or coins, Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever, are you properly registered? Because not being properly licensed can be a criminal offense. And are you trading in currencies in a way that could be money laundering? So you have to be very careful, again, consult with lawyers. And there are a lot of risks there that people don't necessarily perceive when they just go, oh, I just want to buy and sell some of my Bitcoins. Well, you know, depending on what you're doing, you could very easily fall under one of these legal frameworks that requires you to take a number of steps.
Right, because I think right now, sort of like the flavor of the month, if you will, is the SEC. Like, okay, well, oh no, the SEC's issue. And like you said, okay, a couple years ago we were worried about FinCEN. But the reality is those laws haven't gone away. People have grown to understand where the agencies stand and what they have to do. And I think a lot of folks that are sort of new to crypto or like doing an ICO because it's the thing to do right now, are worried about the SEC because that's the thing that is most recent. But there are still money laundering concerns, and so I advise clients to take a look at their system. Like, what do you have? How's money and crypto moving through your system? Is there any room for money laundering? Could it happen? You know, think about it hard, look for the holes, and let's figure out how to make sure that you know, we can patch the holes and make sure that there isn't room for
there's a lot of, I have a lot of clients who are under investigation right now by the FBI, DHS, various people for how they conducted their business or how they conducted their transactions.
So letter of the law aside, what you're saying is that, look, are you controlling for the same risks that the law is trying to control for in your token sale or in your transaction? So when people come to you, when people come to you and your partners to do a token sale, you're looking at the transaction itself, right? But one of the things that I'm also seeing is that, you know, you read a white paper and you see what the ongoing operation of the network is supposed to look like. I mean, people aren't thinking about whether they end up being money transmitters in the context of that ongoing operation, too.
Well, no, because the money transmitter laws cast a very broad net. I mean, by and large, all of the laws say essentially the same thing, which is if you're receiving money for the purpose of transmitting it onward to another party, you're a money transmitter. Okay, well, there's a lot of business models that fall into that net, and so there's certain ways to fix your system so that you're not doing certain ways to set up bank accounts. But yeah, I think people have moved themselves out of the money transmitter category if they're not just running exchange. And that's not exactly true.
Yeah. Well, the laws were first meant to capture remittance companies, right?
Yeah.
MoneyGram, Western Union.
Western Union.
Non-depository financial institutions. But in 2013, FinCEN said, well, also if you're accepting or transmitting cryptocurrency, accepting and transmitting cryptocurrency, if you're acting as a custodian, you know, a hosted wallet service of cryptocurrency, but look, that guidance was prescient in some ways, but it hasn't aged well in other ways. Like, you know, how do we deal with multi-sig arrangements? How do you deal with a token sale itself, the actual sale itself? The text of that guidance doesn't help us there. It wasn't that elastic. It was prescient in a lot of ways, but it wasn't elastic enough to cover some of the things that we're seeing today, is what it seems
The
like.
guidance should be updated, I just don't know if they'll do it
Yeah.
because we're in the Trump administration and they're less inclined to do guidance, which is which is legally non-binding, but is how that agency interprets the law. And there's more of a comment period now, and it's sort of a different period we're in. So
there's an increased now emphasis in the current administration on the notice and comment process of creating real law, real administrative law, as opposed to just issuing guidance with which agencies can do without checking with the public.
Right, they issue guidance but they have broad enforcement authority to go ahead and interpret their own guidance and interpret your business and, well, no, we decided that actually you're a violation. We don't have anything black and white for you to look at, but because you're operating in the gray, we have decided that, you know, you fall into this general category. And that's kind of how a lot of, I mean, that's what fintech is a lot of the time, right? Most of the time, I'm in the gray. Most of the time, all I can give my clients is a risk analysis rather than an actual hard and fast, this is legal, this is illegal, unless they come to me and say, I want to launder money. And if they say that, I'm like, well, okay, so that's illegal. You can't do that. But mostly, they're not doing that. Mostly, they come up with a business. Mostly. Everyone has a bad day, Ryan. Everyone has a bad day. And a weird client. But, and I work in the Bay Area. We get everything. So, I'm just saying, what I tell my clients, you know, typically is I evaluate the system for risk and say, look, you are at risk for being found to, you know, have laundering money or providing an opportunity to launder money.
Yeah. Well, we talked about the SEC, we talked about FinCEN, that is to say securities laws and money services laws. Money services laws were at the forefront of the discussion for most of crypto's history, and now we're starting to shake in a pretty healthy helping of the securities laws. What's next? What's coming down the pipe? Just give us a couple sentences each on what we should expect to see in 2018. We'll start with Veronica.
Oh, I think more out of the CFTC. You don't think so? I think so.
You think more?
CFTC, I think we'll hear.
CFTC, so commodity derivatives enforcement.
Yeah, yeah.
I would agree completely. I think we'll see the market for securities tokens, the market cap for securities tokens exceed that for utility tokens, and I think we'll see more SEC involvement as well. And as I said before, I think the private plaintiffs bar is going to drive a lot of the securities discussion.
Brian?
I just think we're going to see a lot of enforcement actions across the board. I think
More enforcement from government.
whatever alphabet soup agency it is, I think, you know, look at the market cap of these tokens. You know, law enforcement has task force everywhere now. They're all into this. It's going to be a big year of enforcement.
They're just weeding it, but the enforcement action so far getting rid of the really scammy stuff, and then they're
Both
just starting.
criminal and regulatory, to be clear.
Yeah.
Emma?
I think we're going to see not just US regulatory enforcement, but we're going to see global regulatory enforcement and case law. And I think we're going to see case law first. But The good news is that there are extraordinary service providers that are growing up. Obviously, we think we're great, but we can always point you in the direction of a range of people who can offer a lot of services outside legal. Your risks aren't just legal. You know, liquidating your crypto from an ICO is a good example of an issue for ICOs, and Salt and Madsen Partners are two exceptional partners resolving that.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. You heard from the best today, so please.
Give it up for our regulation panel, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you guys have an attorney. All right.